And our first reading is from the First Corinthians letter, chapter 12, verses 1 to 12, and it's called Spiritual Gifts. Now about spiritual gifts, brothers, I do not want you to be ignorant. You know that when you were pagans, somehow or other you were influenced and led astray to mute idols. Therefore I tell you that no one who is speaking by the Spirit of God says, Jesus be cursed, and no one can say, Jesus is Lord, except by the Holy Spirit. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but the same God works all of them in all men. Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit the message of wisdom. To another the message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by that one Spirit. To another miraculously powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in all different kinds of tongues, and to still another the interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and he gives them to each one just as he determines. The body is a unit, though it is made up of many parts, and though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. And our second reading is from John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. Jesus changes water into wine. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to his servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the wine that had been turned into the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This is the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed in the Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him.
So this morning you're going to have an opportunity to respond to, well, whatever parts of the readings you've heard today speak to you. So I'm going to get you to pass these around on your table. Just share them around. There's no particular order. Just take one and pass it on. They're all a bit different. And I invite you to just find the one that speaks to you, either individually or to the person next to you. Just like to take one and pass it round. They're all different. Well, there are 3 forms here. And the same here. And the same here. The idea is you just just take one. Might be the Psalm, it might be the Gospel, it might be the reading from Corinthians. Whichever one it is, I just allow it to speak to you. This is, if you want to know, the sermon part. So you're getting to do the work of actually reflecting on those readings. It might be a word. It might be a line. It might be something that speaks to you. Whatever it is, if you want to, I invite you to jot down those thoughts in the bottom. There's a couple of questions to help lead you. But just let's take about 5 minutes or so just to work on whatever might speak to you in those readings, or to continue whatever other activity you feel led to do. This is a time to allow the creative Spirit of God to work within us. Suddenly the lectionary readings come up and you wonder what will speak to you, what part will stand out to you. Now, you've only had a little time to do it, but I do know some people have been writing a few things, and there's no right or wrong. It's just something speaks to you, something will stand out. I'm wondering who might like to share their thoughts on whichever one they choose from. So if you just say to us which one it is, whether it's the Psalm or the Epistle or the Gospel, and then your response to the questions at the bottom. Do you want to go first, Margaret?
And Rob and I put down, we're all different, but we contribute to the whole. We all have a gift which we should share. And what change or action do you think the writer calls for? Use our gifts for the good of all.
Fantastic. Thank you.
We were looking at the reading where Jesus changes the water into wine, and the first part, what part of this reading speaks to you and why. Jesus can change ordinary things into the extraordinary if we're open to change. But we hadn't actually answered the second one yet.
That's good.
We're still discussing.
That's fine. That's beautiful. I want to pass down to whoever else might like to share.
I took the Psalm, and in that I said the Psalm is saying and encouraging us to see God in nature and life, be tuned in to seeing life in this way and to be blessed through the experience.
We didn't get very far because Bruce and I had a little bit of a discussion, because I'm very practical, and I said I could relate to the fact that he was at a party and someone asked him to get more wine, and he said, why should I? I'm here sort of as a guest.
Yep.
But then afterwards he probably changed his mind, felt a bit guilty and did what he did. And I could relate to many times when I've been, asked to do things and haven't felt like it, and then sort of... However, Bruce, with all his great knowledge of philosophy and behind the scenes, I'll pass over to him as to what he interpreted as. It was different to my interpretation, and so we never got to the last bit, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I looked at the same thing about filling the jars, and I heard these two having a little conversation, so I tried to think a bit deeper for me anyhow. But I think that it came out to me that God has his plans, but if we as his children continue to pray to him with belief, his plans can change, which means that you and I can change things if we continue in prayer. So what change does the writer call for? I think I've got to pray more.
Thank you. Who on this table would like to share?
This comes from Corinthians 12, particularly verse 2, actually. And you are often misled by gods that can't even speak. Now, I don't have the full details of this, but there's hundreds of young girls were kidnapped in one of these countries overseas, and they've escaped now and come back to their original homes, but their community has rejected them, largely because they've been forced to be sexually active and have lost their virginity. As a consequence, the local men will not take them as brides and give them a home. I'm not sure where you go with that, but be careful what you believe without evidence.
Yeah. Did you want to share, Brian?
Yeah. This is the wedding celebration. Jesus loved people and joined in their lives, even enjoying a party. Let us sympathise with and love people, whoever they are, or wherever they are.
Mm.
My reading was the John reading of the wedding in Cana, and I was amazed at Mary and the fact that she noticed that the wine had run out, and she asked Jesus to do something about it, and he said, I can't, or I won't, and she just went ahead as if he didn't say that at all. She had absolute faith in his ability to handle any situation and to do something about it. And so she told the servants to do what he told them to do. And I think that teaches us that we must trust him. And no matter what he tells us to do, if he's telling us, then we can do it.
Fantastic. Have you noticed already there's so many things that begin to speak to us from the readings as we explore them. And they're all different. They all take us in different directions, but they're all meaningful. Anyone here like to share? Anyone at this table? Yeah? Jan? Yes.
The passage that I wanted to comment on was John 2, verses 1 to 11. This passage always puzzles me. When Jesus performs miracles for those who are sick, I understand. But this changing of water into wine at a wedding feast seems, well, to me, to be such a trivial indulgence. Did this really happen? Or did Jesus, at the urging of his mother, buy more wine for the assembled group? Not only more wine, but very good wine. My own feeling is that the writer wished us to see Jesus as a benevolent benefactor, one who respects his mother and at the same time will convey a good atmosphere at the celebration of a new marriage. What change or action do I think he calls for? I think the writer calls for respect for family and friends and joy at times of celebration.
Thank you, Jan. Anyone else at this table like to share? Yep.
What really stood out to me from the 1 Corinthians reading was verse 11. All these things are produced by the one and same Spirit, who gives what he wants to each person. That spoke to me about it is the Spirit that gives what the Spirit chooses to each person. So what change action do you think the writer calls for? To understand more fully that it is not about self and my gifts, in capital letters, but a gift to bless the body of the church. It also says to me, often we look on at the gifts of other people and feel we don't have any. But really, and we should not be envious, but it's the gift of the Spirit for all.
Many years ago, we had someone here called Don Howland, and I remember one morning when we had the service on Corinthians, he said to people, stand up if you help with flowers, stand up if you help with Sunday school, stand up if you help with, all the many things in the church. And there were several people left sitting down. And he said, now look at the people sitting down, because they are the people who come every week without a job to do. They come to worship God. And it really was quite an eye-opener to me, because you often think, oh, this person does so much in the church, and there's that person, or why don't they do more? Well, they come to church, and he said they pray and they worship. And that's what we're here for.
Absolutely. Everyone has a task and a role. Anyone else like to share?
Well, I've got the John reading, and the bit that stood out for me was what Jesus said when Mary pointed out that there was no wine left. And in this version it says, what does that have to do with me? And my memory is that when Margaret read her version, it was, why do you draw me in? Something like that. It was that wording. And what that said to me was that it really highlights my reluctance to get involved in things that I think are too hard or too challenging, or to put the work in to work out what I'm supposed to be getting involved in. And that maybe what the passage was saying was that you do what you know, or you do what you can do, and you trust that the outcomes are going to be what is intended.
So what we discover is that there are many things that speak to us as we read the readings for each week, and you never know what it will be that will stand out for you. A particular word, a phrase, a whole passage. The thing is, each week as we gather for worship, even though it might most of the time be someone out the front like a talking head, the real work goes on within each of us. That's where it's meant to be. The Spirit of God working within each of us. Even when we remain silent, there are still words or things that will speak to us in worship. It might just be a song. It might be a particular thing we're doing. I've noticed a number of people who have been, they've taken the challenge and have been colouring in. And isn't it interesting that you can colour in and still listen at the same time? It is actually possible to do more than one thing at once. And the amazing thing is, for those who are doing the colouring in, how it has the effect of centering you, of actually creating that still, calm space within. My hope and prayer is that you take these things home with you, that you allow that word to continue to speak to you throughout the week. May God give you power to receive the gift of those words with thankfulness and faithfulness enough to submit yourself to the intoxicating joy that it promises. Amen.